Hello, I am Brian Lawrence. I'm an expat living in Malaga City in the beautiful, warm Andalusia, Spain. This video is for anyone who is planning or recently moved to Spain and intends to stay as a resident and wants to be able to drive in this wonderful country. Note that this talk is for people moving to Spain from a country that does not have an agreement to simply exchange an existing license. That means if you are from the United States or Canada, this video is for you. We will cover the following. We'll look at legal requirements. What are you required to do and when? We'll talk about the timeline, how long it could take to get your license. I will then talk about the requirements of getting your Spanish license here in Spain. That has two parts, the theory test as well as the practical exam. Legal requirements, as I mentioned, if you're an expat from a country that does not have an agreement from Spain, to simply exchange your existing license, like the United States or Canada, there are some things you need to know. If you are a tourist, however, and you're just visiting Spain, even if you're visiting for a while, like the summer, the good news is that you do not have to worry about getting a Spanish driver license. You can get an international driver's permit, which is very simple. You can literally go to any AAA center in the States, or if you're in Canada, the CAA, and get one quickly and easily. In the States, it costs $20, and you can basically get it immediately. It's just a booklet with your photo that has translations in common languages like Spanish, French, German, you name it. But if you're watching this, that means you're probably an expat or planning on becoming an expat in Spain, and you expect to be here for more than 90 days, which means you'll need a visa. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that you will need to get your Spanish license. Technically, Spain expects you to have this license no later than 6 months after you arrive here in Spain. I know some of you might be saying, do I really need to get my license? Maybe you know someone who has been living here in Spain already and has been driving with their US or Canadian license without actually going through this whole process. The short answer is yes, you need to get your license. If you don't, you could get fined. You could have your car impounded. And I've even read cases where it might be a problem with your insurance, your car insurance. They might have a problem insuring you or covering an accident if that is to happen, God forbid. So to me, having your license is really going to give you that peace of mind, not to have to worry about those things. As well as, there are things in Spain that you have to learn and are things that you would not know from driving in the United States or Canada. There's just some differences. So going through this process will really give you that peace of mind. So we have 6 months to get that Spanish license, which means we have 6 months where we can use our US-based license and international permit. That's great news. But unfortunately, 6 months is not a long time, especially here in Spain. Everything takes time. Here's a timeline that will give you a rough idea of what to expect. This isn't an exact science. First thing you'll need is your TA, which is basically your residency card. And you know that if you are becoming an expat here in Spain, you need that for almost anything. You will need some time to get that as well. So in this example timeline, let's just say it takes 2 months to get your TA. And then as part of getting your Spanish license, you have to go through a theory test and a practical exam as well. So again, let's just give you 2 months to get the theory test out of the way, which would include a medical check, which I'll talk about later, and another 2 months to get that practical scheduled and basically trained for, because you're going to have to work with a driving school for your practical, which will again take time. So all in all, if you take that in mind and you use 2 months for each of these milestones, you're already looking at 6 months. And I'm telling you that it can take longer than this estimate. It took me longer. There's two approaches to going about getting your Spanish license: the cheap way or the fast way, which is not so cheap. The cheap way is doing as much by yourself without the help of a driving school as you can legally. I decided to go the cheap way, so I'm going to talk about that first. You can study and schedule the theory test by yourself without having to go through a Spanish driving school. Honestly, just do a quick search online for Spanish theory test practice, and most likely the first one that you will see is the one I use and the one that most people use. It will be useful to practica, the tests, as there are many questions you will need to take. The good news is that the DGT provides questions in English. Now, the DGT is basically the Spanish version of the DMV. The bad news is that the translation is a little rough. Because of this, there will absolutely be questions you will need to know because you're not going to be able to guess the correct answer. You will absolutely have to memorize some of them. The website I use provides free tests, but you will need to pay a small amount to be able to take as many tests as you really need to be able to practice. I honestly spent a good month and probably took over 100 tests before attempting my theory test. Another thing that you should be aware of, to even take the theory test, you will need to get a medical check. Medical check's not very difficult. They have them available at any authorized center, which means that basically any medical center around you will be able to provide the service. And they're also pretty cheap. They're not covered by insurance, but the average is 25 euros for a medical check. It's pretty basic. They check your eyes, they check your hearing, and you have to take a motor skill test, which is basically like a video game. You use both your hands. You basically turn a little wheel, and you have to keep a circle within lines that move around. So it's a little more complicated than I expected, but it's pretty easy. So you get that medical check, and once you have that certificate, it's valid for 90 days. That is 90 days until you pass your theory test. Once you pass your theory test, and you start working with a driving school after, the certificate is good for 2 years, I believe. The other thing just to be aware of is that to get your theory test, you will have to make an appointment with the DGT first, where you'll present them with the information that you need to be able to sign up to take the theory test, and then you'll work with them to get that theory test scheduled. The actual theory test is just 30 questions. When I say just 30 questions, that's 30 questions, but there are a ton of questions that could be used in those 30 questions. And you get 30 minutes to complete. If you get 3 questions wrong, you can still pass, which is basically an A-. But you really are going to want to make sure you are ready for this. By the time I took my first theory exam, I had been studying and taking mock tests for about a month. I failed. I also noticed as I was taking the theory test that there were questions that I hadn't seen with the online version. The reason for this is that the website I was using did not have all the current questions. That brings me back to the easier and potentially quicker way to go, use a driving school. My understanding is that the driving school gets their questions directly from the DGT and might help prepare you a little bit better than the online version, but you can do it with the online version. You don't need a driving school to take and pass your theory, but it might make it easier, even though it might be more expensive. Something to consider. Okay, so I mentioned I failed my first theory exam. FYI, because of that, I then had to schedule another appointment with the DGT to once again sign up for another test. That alone right there took about 3 weeks. So you can see that 6 months to get all this done is not a lot of time. Now, I did pass my second theory test with only one wrong answer. In retrospect, I think it might have been faster and less stressful to just work with a driving school from the start, but I did it using the practice test site and saved a little bit of money. Okay, congrats. You've gotten past the theory test, whether you did it by yourself using that website I mentioned or worked through a driving school. But guess what? Now you must absolutely sign up with a driving school. You can't just practice on your own and sign up for a practical exam with the DGT directly. This is not the states. You must work with a driving school. The good news is that there's a ton of these driving schools all over the place. If you have been in Spain for more than a week, you may have noticed the cars driving around with the big L on the top of them. The other thing to consider here is that the price is going to vary, but I would estimate it's going to cost you between 500 to 1,000 euros, depending on how many lessons your instructor thinks that you need. In Spain, driving schools are big business, and there are a lot of schools available, as I mentioned already. Picking a driving school can be as hard as picking the next color for your bathroom, honestly. This may depend on where you live, but if you are near a larger city like Malaga, Madrid, or Barcelona, you will have a ton of options. This can also be a little trickier if you don't speak Spanish well. Many of the instructors, especially in some of the larger schools, don't speak English. You might have to go outside of the main city to one of the tourist towns and go with a Spanish school there to find an instructor that speaks English. For me, my Spanish is not that great. I'm getting better, but I was not comfortable working with an instructor that did not speak English, so I was able to find an English instructor close to where I live here in Malaga who was perfect. You can feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can, if you're in the Malaga area, and I can provide the contact details. My instructor spoke perfect English and came highly recommended. Now, once you've signed up for the driving school, you will start your lessons. Depending on the school you go to, lessons may be handled differently. In some of the larger schools, you may be in a group of other learners. As you go through the process of finding a school, if you would prefer to avoid that, I would ask if they do private lessons or not. I was very fortunate to have private lessons the full time. I've heard stories and seen some other videos online about getting your Spanish driver's license where some folks have done it in a group, and in that group they were dealing with brand new drivers. Now personally, I had to teach both of my children to drive, and I knew how stressful that was. Now imagine going for a lesson with a brand new driver. Oh my gosh. I would seriously consider if you like those types of things, you might be okay with that, but consider that as you start your search here for a driving school. Again, I mentioned my instructor was fantastic. He first met with me. The way that this worked in terms of the lessons, he met with me first, and he said, "Drive." What he was doing was just taking a look at how I've been driving for a long time, seeing how I drove, and taking notes as I went so that he could then do a better job instructing me on maybe some bad habits I've learned over the last 20 plus years. Coming from the States, also, in the States, you'd mostly drive automatic cars. Now, I did drive manual for many years in the States, but I really was never formally trained on how to drive a manual car. And luckily, with this driving school, they really provided some pretty awesome insights into things I just was doing wrong for a very long time, and things that the Spanish government expects me to know how to do with a manual car. Now, a couple of just quick notes. There is a lot to learn here in Spain. I mentioned in the very beginning of this video that driving in Spain can be different than driving in the United States and in Canada, and that's true. For one thing, there's a ton of roundabouts. If you're driving in the city, you'll have to really be aware of everything. There's motor scooters, there's motorcycles, there's people on just electric scooters, there's pedestrians who always have the right of way, and they are always going to be jumping in front of you. There's blinking yellow lights. There's all of these things that you just don't really have to deal with so much in the States. So as we went through their lessons, These are things that my instructor taught me. Also, there's these things called open and closed brackets. If you have no idea what that is, you will know when you're done with these lessons, and they can be pretty confusing. As we progressed, he kept his notes. All in all, we had 5 lessons together, 5 lessons over 2 weeks. Once he thought I was ready, he worked to get a lesson scheduled. Now, because we are in Malaga City, which is a larger place, larger city, getting an exam scheduled took some time as well. It was also during the summer, and I had vacation. My instructor had vacations. I'm sure the DGT had some time off as well. So all in all, it took several months just to get an exam scheduled, even after the majority of my lessons were done. In my case, once we had the exam scheduled, we had one last lesson a couple days before the exam so that we could brush up and make sure I was really, truly ready to go for this exam. Great. Now, my particular examiner was fantastic, but I did my best at the very beginning to be very friendly. I told him that I was learning Spanish. I told him I was taking classes, Spanish classes twice a week, but that I was still learning. I think that the fact that I showed him I was trying to learn and understand the language and my positive attitude really helped with the test. In fact, he used some English as much as he could. Now, it's kind of interesting because in the beginning of these tests also, they're going to ask you some questions. And it's going to be a question about your car. Most likely it'll be about where the emergency lights are, the hazard lights, or where's the parking brake. But basically it could be about anything. Now, my examiner asked me something in Spanish, and I thought I understood him, but I asked him to repeat. And when he repeated, honestly, I didn't understand one word. So at that point, now my instructor, who's not supposed to say anything, he did say one word. Or maybe he mouthed it. It was emergency, which immediately helped me understand that yes, the examiner was asking me about where are the hazard lights, and of course I pointed to them immediately, and he was happy. He was happy with that. So just be aware, brush up on your Spanish as much as you can. Brush up on the common Spanish words that would be for a car, like hazard lights or the lights in general or any of those things, and you should be fine. All right, so going back to my exam, I did my thing. Mentioned that little scary situation, but I started driving. Now, in this situation, my examiner decided to give me some general direction at the very beginning, which isn't always the normal way to go about it. But he had a location in mind that he wanted to take me. Everything was going just fine. I was doing what I was taught. I was paying attention, watching the speed limit, even moving to the fast lane. And in Malaga, there's lanes where if you stay in the right lane, you're only limited to 30 kilometers an hour. In the left lane, you can go 50, so you don't always have to drive in the right in those situations. So I did that. I went to the left to get us to our location a little bit faster. Doing my best to pay attention, going through the roundabouts, all of that. Now, only after about 5 minutes in my situation is when the examiner started giving instructions. Eventually, he brought me to a spot that he knew, and this is something that you will be very well aware of before you take a test if you have a good instructor. It's the dreaded stop sign. There's not a lot of stop signs in Spain, honestly. There's a lot of yields, there's a lot of roundabouts, but not so many stop signs. But when there is a stop sign, you have to stop. You have to completely stop where you're supposed to before the line or at the curb where you're expected to stop. And in Spain, you're also expected to make sure that you don't pull out of a stop without having very clear visibility of what's coming from your left and your right, which means that typically you have to stop, fully stop, creep up a little bit, stop again, fully stop, look both ways. If you still can't see, creep up a little bit more, stop, fully stop, until you really feel comfortable that you can go. And honestly, in the test, he'll expect you to stop once, creep, and then fully stop again, no matter what. So I did that. But this particular intersection had a little bit of a trick to it. The trick was that he wanted me to go to the intersection and make a left with a stop sign. I stopped fully, creeped up a little bit, stopped again, looked both ways with my blinker on to make a left. Okay, I was good to make the left, started making the left, and that's as soon as I started making that left, I realized that in this situation, this intersection, there is a yield lane for me to make that left and then yield into the main lane, which is like super unique. I've never seen that before in the States. Luckily, I saw it, and he was obviously trying to get me there. I saw it, I pulled into the yield lane and then merged into the main lane, and perfect. No problem at all. And I am pretty sure that once he saw that, he knew, okay, if I was going to screw anything up, I was going to screw that up, and I didn't. So he was happy. And basically he told me to, okay, go back to the spot where we started. And I did that, and that was it. All in all, in my situation, it was only 15 minutes, very even, very easy. The examiner even said, muy bien, Brian, which was a great way to end a 6+ month long journey. The next day I went to my driving school and I picked up my temporary driving permit. Now, in Spain, you get your driving permit right away pretty much from your driving school if you passed. But then it could take up to about a month, 2 months for your driving license, the actual license, to arrive in the mail. I'm still waiting, but it'll be here at some point. The other thing you're going to get if you pass is this L placard to put on the back left of your rear window. New licensed drivers are required to have this displayed for a year. If you have been driving for a while, there is a way to get an exception. For me, I worked hard, and I honestly see this as a badge of honor. Plus, maybe some of the Spanish drivers will give me more of a break. The only downside is that the legal alcohol limit is lower if you have the L, because you're considered a novice driver. But honestly, it's already lower than it is in the States. The legal limit here is 0.5. With the L, it is a 0.3. In the States, we're looking at a 0.8. Not a problem for me. I mean, we all know the safest alcohol level when driving is 0. And let me tell you, in Spain, you have to be 110%. At least when you're in the city. There are always people walking in front of you, motorcycles, scooters, other cars pulling in front of you, and it really does require your full attention. If you want to have a beer here in Spain, but you have to drive, I would recommend a 0 alcohol beer here. It seems to be much more common, probably because driving can be a little bit more tricky. But if you really want that exception and you don't want to have that L in the back, you will have to provide a certified driving record from the States, which could also be a pain to get. But ask your school if that's what you want. It can be done. Otherwise, I would consider this your trophy for all of the hard work that you just put in. Okay, that's about all I have to say about that. I think one more thing I didn't mention is that when you pay the DDT, it's a little less than 100 euros, and that gives you 3 attempts in total. That's 3 attempts between your theory and your practical. So in other words, if you fail your theory once, pass it twice, but then fail your practical exam 3, you'll have to pay again, that 100 euros again. Luckily for me, I failed my theory once, not lucky. I passed it second time, and luckily I passed my practical the first time, so I only had to pay 100 once. But again, if you lose your 3 chances, you have to pay again. Thanks for watching. If you have a bunch of questions, feel free to add them in the comments. Or, like I've mentioned in some of my previous videos, a really good resource for expats in Spain is Facebook groups. There's a bunch of really good ones: American expats in Spain, American expatriates in Spain, Americans in Spain, or if you're in Malaga, expats in Malaga. If you're in other places like Sevilla, Madrid, Barcelona, just do a search on Google. I'm on Facebook. I'm sure you'll find some expats from wherever in those locations as well, and you'll get a lot of questions answered in those groups. So highly recommend you go to those groups. Also, some references here, just to note that some of the images I use in this presentation are for free from unsplash.com. Great resource if you also want to create some presentations, whether it's for work or some YouTube videos. But again, thanks for watching. I like to put videos out about living here in Spain. I also occasionally put videos out about software development, coaching, even once in a while about how to make some recipes. But feel free to subscribe and comment, and that's all there is. So have a great day, and thanks for watching.